So today, we're digging into an official inquiry about a tragedy that, frankly, should never have happened. We're going to unpack the critical failures that led to a man's death, all laid out in the independent report on his killer. It all starts with something just horrifyingly simple. On September 2nd, 2004, a man named Denis Finnegan was just enjoying a bike ride through Richmond Park. And then his life was ended in a sudden, random, and completely unprovoked act of violence. And that right there, that is the central question of this whole thing. You see, Denis Finnegan's killer was a man named John Barrett, a patient with a long, violent psychiatric history. So how on earth was it possible that a high-risk individual who was admitted to a secure forensic unit, that's a specialized hospital for patients in the legal system, was just able to walk out? Well, an independent inquiry was launched to find out exactly that.
To really get what happened here, you first have to understand who John Barrett was. And the inquiry report makes one thing crystal clear. He was not some unknown quantity, not even close. His entire history was basically a roadmap of escalating risk.
Okay, so Barrett's diagnosis was paranoid schizophrenia. And his core delusion, the belief that drove so much of his behavior for years, was that he was under constant police surveillance for past sexual offenses. And this one powerful, false belief completely warped his perception of the world, and it fueled his paranoia and his violence. And this timeline, wow, it just lays out all the red flags, one after another. In '97, he's admitted for the first time. Fast forward to 2002, and he commits this frenzied knife attack on 3 people, nearly killing one of them. And yet despite that, and against the direct advice of the Home Office, a tribunal lets him out on a conditional discharge in 2003. And less than a year later, he murders Denis Finnegan. Every single one of these points was a chance to stop what was coming. And listen, the warnings weren't just some vague notes in a file. They were loud and clear. As early as 1999, his own partner, JW, the person who knew him better than anyone, was calling his care team with terrifying alerts, just like this one. She was his main caregiver, and tragically, she was also a frequent victim of his violence, and her warnings were this constant, overlooked drumbeat in the background of his medical history. So this brings us to the heart of the inquiry, because it wasn't just one mistake that led to this. The report describes what it calls a cascade of failures, a total systemic breakdown across the entire service that was supposed to be caring for him. And this, right here, is the inquiry's big takeaway. It is an absolutely damning conclusion. This isn't about blaming one doctor or one nurse. The report found that the entire organization, the one responsible for managing some of the most dangerous patients in society, was itself fundamentally broken. So let's break down what that actually looked like on the ground. Decisions were completely dominated by senior doctors, so the nurses and social workers on the front lines, their concerns were often just overruled. The case notes, the one thing that should have been the source of truth, were so woefully disorganized you could barely track his decline. His partner's warnings, they were just dismissed as relationship drama. And get this, the actual risk assessment forms they were using were described by one senior psychiatrist as having no basis in anything at all. Just staggering.
And just look at the dangerous disconnect this created. In April 2004, just a few months before the murder, his doctor is writing to the Home Office saying Barrett is extremely insightful about his illness. At the exact same time, his partner is telling the team she's seeing a significant change. This emotional flatness, that cold, detached person she knew, was a sign he was getting really, really sick again. The official record and the reality on the ground were like 2 different worlds.
And men, there's this number, 11 weeks. Just let that sink in for a second. During that critical summer of 2004, when his partner was raising alarm after alarm as his behavior was getting more and more erratic, an incredible 11 weeks went by between his appointments with his main doctor. For a patient with this kind of history, that is a catastrophic gap in care. Okay, so now we're going to zoom right in on those final critical hours. The inquiry focused intensely on the day Barrett just walked away, and what it found was a chain of screw-ups that directly paved the way for the tragedy. So he gets admitted because the team is finally worried, but then his doctor grants him leave to walk in the grounds, over the phone, without even seeing him. At 3 p.m., he uses that leave to walk right out the door and just vanishes. The staff then wait for hours to even start the official absent without leave procedure. And you're not going to believe this, but the police are not formally told that this high-risk patient is missing until 9:30 the next morning. And just 30 minutes after the police were finally contacted, a full 18 hours after he walked out, that cascade of failures reached its inevitable, tragic end. John Barrett, driven by the delusions in his head, picked a man at random and murdered him.
So what's the takeaway here? What can we learn from all this? The inquiry wasn't just about pointing fingers. It was really about understanding these deep systemic cracks to try and prevent this from ever happening again.
The report really boils it down to these key things. First, the team consistently put Barrett's wishes, his desire for freedom, his complaints about medication, ahead of public safety. It's a classic trap. They also failed to challenge his stories, just taking what he said at face value, even when all the evidence pointed the other way. The organization had no real leadership, which just created chaos. And maybe most importantly, they totally failed to use the vital intelligence from his partner, the one person who could see the whole picture.
And this quote from the report, I think it gets to the absolute core of the whole problem. Forensic mental health is this constant, really difficult balancing act. How do you give therapy and care to someone while also making sure the public is safe? And in the case of John Barrett, the inquiry found that balance was dangerously and fatally lost. And that really leaves us with this one huge, profound question. The entire system is built on managing this tension between patient freedom and public safety. But when that system breaks down, when that balance tips the wrong way, this case forces us all to ask, who ends up bearing the ultimate risk? Well, for Denis Finnegan and his family, the answer was everything.